The way we plan to move ahead in the panel discussion is each one of our panelists will be showing in a video presentation of 4 minutes each, and then later we will have a question and answer session, and we will take it forward like that from there on. So can I please invite Dr. Anil Vendre to share the screen? All my participants have logged in, I know that. So please share your screen and take this forward from here on.
Yes.
Yeah.
At the outset, I thank Dr. Alka Kumar for this new approach to the panel. My video is on the diagnostic hysteroscopy and uterine polyps. Though we have a smaller diameter hysteroscope, I prefer doing all my hysteroscopies under anesthesia. Our hysteroscopies are most of the time as a part of infertility workup, but very oftenly we do the hysteroscopy along with our laparoscopies. So I'll start my video. We prepare the cervix by asking the patient to take 2 tablets of misoprostol vaginally the night before the surgery. We use small diameter hysteroscope in the beginning of the procedure, and if the need be, we switch over to the bigger diameters. We prefer to negotiate the cervix under vision, as shown in the video, and we have to rarely negotiate the cervix with patients till the uterus is filled up with the media and it opens the cervix from inside. Most of the time we negotiate the cervix with this way, as shown in the video, but sometimes we can dilate the cervix. We don't hesitate to dilate the cervix. Then we gently go inside the uterine cavity to see the tubal ostia and panoramic view of the uterus from inside. Uterine polyps are the hyperplastic overgrowths of the endometrial glands and stroma. They can grow from anywhere in the uterine cavity. They can be either pedunculated. They have various sizes, range from half a centimeter to 4 to 5 centimeters, sometimes prolapse out of the uterine cervix. Most common presenting symptom is intermenstrual bleeding, or sometimes they are asymptomatic. The most important differential diagnosis is uterine fibroids. Small polyps can be very well be delineated and diagnosed, but big polyps has to be differentiated from the uterine myoma. The differentiating points are polyps are smaller, they are deeply red in color, they are thinner and less firmer on the touch, instrumental touch, whereas fibroids are firm on touch, and they are white in color and have superficial vessels also. This particular big mass is polyp, not a fibroid. Small polyps can be removed easily with the scissors. The polyps which are lesser in size than 2 centimeters can easily be removed with the help of scissors, but bigger polyp like this has to be removed with the help of bipolar loop, as is shown in the video. Women taking OC pills and obese women have high tendency to have polyps. 95% of uterine polyps are benign, but sometimes they can be malignant. Of course, histopathology will help in diagnosing the malignant polyps. Am I audible? Hello?
Yes, you're audible.
Yes, you're very much audible. You're audible.
Yeah. That is all. I think I could not show the small polyp to be cut with the help of scissors, but this was a little bigger polyp which I had removed with the help of bipolar energy.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Anil. Is there anything else you want to show?
No, that's it. That's it.
So
Shall I stop sharing my this screen?
Yes, as you wish. Yes. So
yes.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
What are the indications to doing a hysteroscopy? And would you be doing hysteroscopy in all your cases of infertility, primary as well as secondary?
As I said in the beginning, I usually do my hysteroscopy along with a laparoscopy as a workup of infertility patients. And most important indications of hysteroscopy are like abnormal uterine premenopausal or postmenopausal bleedings, endometrial thickening, polyps, sometimes submucous or some intramural fibroids also, intrauterine adhesions, some retained products of conception or intrauterine contraceptive devices. These are the indication to remove all these things. We can do hysteroscopy.
Yes, doctor. I see something. You want to put in a word?
Yeah. Am I audible?
Yes.
Actually, I will prefer hysteroscopy in some selected cases. In whenever the patient of infertility comes to us, actually we have to ask the history about any history of previous surgery, any previous infection. And in routine patient, young patient, and also age of the patient and the duration of marriage is also very important. Secondly, especially I'm selecting the patient of infertility with such history, also is a young patient. In generally in IUI patient, I always prefer to have a hysteroscopy, and in all my IVF patient, I always do pre-IVF hysteroscopy. One thing important I would like to tell you, see many times we say that with 3D and we can diagnose many things, but micropolyps, Alka, you are well versed all these things. The typical micropolyps we'll get during this hysteroscopic finding, and you will only find it on hysteroscopy. And treatment is very simple, like you have to give doxycycline course. And I have seen my 3 of patient my conceived with unexplained infertility and with this treatment. So I think it's very rewarding.
Yeah, you are right, Dr. Sushma. I would like to put in a point here that it's when we put in the hysteroscope, evaluation of the endometrium is a very important part of hysteroscopy. And I think we are still wanting to have more studies as far as a pre-IVF hysteroscopy is an absolute essential or not. But I'm sure my entire panel would say a yes to that, because the kind of images that we see, the kind of pathologies that we see are innumerable. Not only that, the endometrium in the proliferative phase looks different, in the ovulatory phase looks different, it looks different in secretory phase, hyperplastic, and the atrophic endometrium looks completely different. It's a bald endometrium with crisscross muscles and subpetechial hemorrhages. So I think that's a very important part of looking at the endometrium while going ahead and doing a hysteroscopy. I will invite the second speaker. My second speaker for today is Dr. Aarti Luthra. So Dr. Aarti, please share the screen, and she will be talking to us about the septum. Dr. Aarti is there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah.
So, can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see you. We can hear you. Please go ahead.
So, let me go 1 second. It's not a...
Please maximize the window first, ma'am. The green button. The green.
Congratulations, Dr. Sunita and Team IAG for this wonderful IAG conference. And I would like to thank you all for inviting me here to share your views. I'm going to talk about management of uterine septum by hysteroscopy. As we all know, septate uterus has been associated with an increased risk of miscarriage, premature delivery, malpresentation, and there is insufficient evidence that septum is associated with infertility. When we treat a septum, we see an improvement in the live birth rate in women with history of prior pregnancy loss and recurrent miscarriages. But a patient of infertility without any history of prior pregnancy loss and a small septum, it may be prudent to decide carefully about the treatment of septum. As we know that a uterine septum is believed to develop as a result of failure of resorption of the Mullerian ducts connecting prior to 20th embryonic week, and it is due to the failure of resorption that we see a septum which may be a complete septum or a partial septum. A proper diagnosis of septum is very, very important before offering the treatment. And nowadays, I think hysteroscopic treatment is the only treatment as compared to about 3 decades ago when people were doing laparotomy for the management of septum, which had lots of complications and poor obstetric outcome. So I'm going to share this video for hysteroscopic septum dissection. as we all know, for diagnosis, ultrasound is the most sensitive, is a very sensitive tool, and 3D ultrasonography can be as sensitive as 81%. Sonohysterography gives us further resolution to see the cavity and decide the kind of anomaly the cavity has. HSG is another modality which we are doing routinely for all our infertile patients, and HSG gives us a very clear idea about the cavity of the uterus. It is 55% accurate in differentiating septate and cornuate uterus. The side effects of HSG would be pain, PID, and radiation exposure. MRI is a very good modality which is almost 100% accurate for intrauterine lesions, but it is a costly affair. It's very good if we have doubt about the cavity. So when we start the procedure, thick septa are to be dealt under anesthesia. If the lady has a thin septa, that can be done as office hysteroscopy, and one has to distend the cavity properly, but it's better to avoid over distension to avoid fluid overload. Common complications which can occur while dealing hysteroscopic septum excision could be bleeding, perforation, or rarely rupture in subsequent pregnancy. But a proper resection gives a good overall pregnancy rate of 70 to 80% after the surgery. The risk of the bleeding would be more if the operator is drifting close to the uterine wall rather than being towards the center of the septum. And endpoint for the surgery would be the panoramic view, when we can see both the ostia clearly. Most of the times, if you are doing a concomitant laparoscopy, we see a broad fundus. And this sign, I like to check this, that you see the hysteroscopic light through transilluminating through the laparoscope without any light. Another case which I'm going to share is management of septum using a monopolar current with this Collins knife. Although nowadays, until unless the septum is very thick or muscular, scissors are the preferred mode of treatment. Why? Because for scissors we are using normal saline, and the risk of hyponatremia will be less in the lady, and the complications would be less. Although be it saline or glycine, if the procedure takes very long time, the risk of fluid overload may be there. For septa, post-op estrogen or Foley's catheter to avoid adhesions is normally not needed, because it is a very clean dissection of the septa. But for intrauterine synechia, most of the times we need to put in some treatment to avoid adhesions, like we can create hypoestrogenemia by giving estrogen therapy for 2-3 cycles. Most of these cases, they can be advised to go and try for pregnancy after 2 months of the procedure. So I'll quickly share these practice guidelines for management of hysteroscopic distending media. Alka, you can stop me the moment.
Yeah, you are done with your time, Dr. Aarti.
Yeah, okay. So just one thing I would like to point here, the limits of the fluid. For elderly patients with comorbid conditions, the maximum fluid deficit should not be more than 750 ml as per AGL. For healthy patients, it can be up to 1 liter, but the max limit cannot be above 2.5 liters. And if it is a big myoma or some other long procedure, we must counsel the patient that we may do the procedure in 2 sittings. Thank you.
Dr. Aarti, there's a question for you.
Yeah.
When do you stop doing your septoplasty or metroplasty? What is the landmark that you take?
See, we have to go in the panoramic view when we can see both the ostia simultaneously. In one view, we stop the procedure. We should not be over enthusiastic in our dissection, and we should try to remain towards the midline only. And we should try to stop 1 centimeter short of ostia when we are going for dissection. And a lot of times when you're not very clear, a little arcuate uterus can be left, because that would also give us good reproductive outcome. But over enthusiastic surgery may lead to perforation or risk of uterine rupture later on when the lady conceives.
So here I would like to put in a word that in a unicornuate uterus, So
Yeah.
there is a role of metroplasty as well. There's a study which has been done by Zia et al. And in that study, initially they had 3 live births. What they did was, at the fundus, they created a niche, and then they did a lateral septoplasty. And then they took forward their study with 31 patients. And out of 31 patients, 16 of them on a unicornuate uterus had live births. So you create an inverted shaped cavity. And that is something which I've been reading a lot about, and we've been discussing the unicornuate uterus very much. We are running a bit slow on the time, so I will invite the next speaker, Dr. Haresh. Is he there? Dr. Haresh is there? I don't
Sir,
hear.
unmute yourself. Dr. Haresh is here. Kindly unmute yourself.
Hello. Can you hear me now?
Yes, now we can hear you, sir. Go on.
Good morning. Can I share my screen?
Yes, please. We
Yeah.
can hear you well, so
Can-
please share your screen.
Yeah, okay.
Dr. Haresh?
Yeah. I have some issue here. 1 second.
Okay, so
Jan.
I was going to. So at the tubal ostia, in fact, there are just 3 anatomical landmarks inside the uterine cavity. One is the endocervix and the 2 tubal ostia. So it's very important that especially while doing a septoplasty, that we keep bringing our hysteroscope back at the level of the internal os and keep looking at the 2 tubal ostia. Not only that, when we are doing a septum, whether we are using the Collins knife or we are using the scissors, we must keep into the plane. The plane of incision should be actually anteroposteriorly also. It has to be evaluated so that you don't go either above or below while cutting. So the better idea is to bring your hysteroscope out, and then by outer at the level of the internal os, and then keep going in. That is one bit which is very important in doing a septoplasty. The other thing is that Dr. Stefano Bertucci et al. Have published a new paper regarding the septum. So they are now advising, of course it's a challenge that the studies need to be more, but they are advising that we actually incise the septum, and then we anteroposteriorly also resect out the part of the septum. That is one bit which I think requires more studies, more outcomes. As it is in a septoplasty, we still have a school of thoughts which are going on. Yeah, Dr. Haresh, are we ready?
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, we are.
Okay, we can't see your screen though.
1 minute, ma'am.
So we do have these technical issues and virtual platforms. So we're all.
Ma'am, can you see my
Yes,
screen?
We can hear you. We can see you. Please go on.
Yeah. So first of all, I'd like to thank Sunita madam and Alka madam for giving this opportunity. So I'll be showing few videos on hysteroscopic myomectomy. So first, let me start with the type 0 submucous fibroid resection with scissors. So here actually we can have 2 types of type 0 fibroid. One where the base of the fibroid is quite broad and it is attached to the endometrium. And the second type is where you will find a fibroid which is attached to the endometrium with a very small pedicle. So here, this is not a very big fibroid, around 2 into 2 centimeter fibroid. So type 0 fibroid. So we are using a scissor. You can see how we are using a scissor to separate the fibroid from the endometrium. So here you can see the stalk where the fibroid is attached. So one thing is important, like when you cut the fibroid from the endometrium, you keep on pushing it so that you can find a proper plane where you have to cut. And here you can see little amount of fibroid is left behind. So this can actually give rise to a recurrence. So I have shown it. So if little bit of fibroid remains, that has to be removed later on. Now, one question is like here, you can see the fibroid is moving around. So how to take it out? So if it is a very small fibroid, we can hold it with a grasper and we can take it out. But if it is a little bigger one, we can slice it and then take it out. Then this is another fibroid, same thing, type 0 fibroid, where I'm showing the use of a resectoscope. So if the fibroid is hard and big, like 3-4 centimeter, which is not going to be easily managed with a scissor, you can slice it. Slicing should start from the topmost point and then slowly proceed towards the base of the fibroid. So you can use a monopolar or a bipolar depending on the availability. And in type 0 fibroid, the chance of fluid related complications are usually less because we don't open up too much of vascular spaces and endometrium. So slowly you go towards the base, and then once you see the myometrial fascicles, you have to stop the resection. So here the last bit of the tissue is removed. Then this is again type 1 submucous fibroid. In type 1, more than 50% of the fibroid will be protruding into the cavity. So here you have to be a little bit careful because you have to go deeper into the myometrium. So we can start from one side of the fibroid at the endomyometrial junction. Then that will give you some idea, some ideas as to where is the myometrium and how deep I have to go. So slowly, progressively, you have to keep on slicing the fibroid. And then once you reach towards the myometrium, like once you go towards the myometrium, you can see the fibers, whitish, pinkish fibers. So there one has to be very careful, and the slicing has to be very thin. You have to take, by thin stroke, you can remove the fibroid. So you can see here, most of the thing are removed, and you can see the pinkish, whitish, myometrial fibers. So that is the point where we should stop resecting, and it is always better to under resect than go and create trouble. And this is again another type 2 submucous fibroid. This is a very a tricky situation. Only experienced people should do it. So here, and the size also, you should not take a very big size. Usually up to 3 centimeter size is it should be resected if it is a type 2 submucous fibroid. The principle is same. You keep on cutting the fibroid and look for myometrium. So once you find the myometrium, take a very thinner slices and then complete it. So here you can see it is almost over. And one important thing is here, when you do this type of myomectomy, reduce the pressure in between. So once you reduce the pressure in between, the fibroid will protrude more into the operating field. So that way, if it's a small fibroid, even in a single setting, you can finish the resecting. My time is over, or still it is there?
Yes, I think we can take the questions.
Yeah, madam. Yeah. If there is any question, I'll be happy to answer.
So I would like to know from you, what is the size? First of all, do you do any myomas in the office setting?
Madam, if it is a very small fibroid, only we do it. So 1.5, 2 centimeter fibroid, only that, and that is also type 0, only those type we attempt in office. Otherwise, most of these cases we take in the operating room.
And what is the technique that you prefer in your operation theater? As we have seen the videos, it's mostly the slicing technique.
Yeah, madam. So yeah, it is mostly slicing technique that we follow with resectoscope, and we don't have bipolar. We are using monopolar only. So the traditional slicing method only we use.
Okay, so here I would like to put in a point that what the classification you talked about was ESGE.
Yes,
there's
madam.
another classification, the step
step W classification. Yeah.
So in the last mark classification, you have the opportunity more and better to decide pre-operatively.
Yes,
because of the intravasations, which you very rightly said, myomas are very vascular, and the point to be very careful about doing a myoma is always the fluid intravasation. Exactly. And that is what I think needs to be in the purview. And even Dr. Stefano Bertocci, Dr. Gubini, everybody likes to restrict their size in the office setting without anesthesia to about 1.5, upper limit 2 centimeter of a fibroid. Of course, it's not just grade 0, grade 1 also. But it's in the operation theater setting that you actually would like to take up a bigger set of fibroids. And at the same time, the pseudocapsule, we are discussing a lot of the pseudocapsule in the hysteroscopy areas. It's the collagen, the fibrous vascular tissue, which is kind of joining in the bridging between the myoma and the myometrium. So you reach the, just like in laparoscopy, you reach the plane of the pseudocapsule and then you start resecting out from there. I push your instrument towards the myometrium and pull the, just like we would, isolate the myoma, do it similarly in hysteroscopy.
It's like creating a plane between the fibroid and the myometrium.
Yes. Yes. So I'll take the next speaker, please. The next, Dr. Harish, are you ready? So we'll go on. Okay, Dr. Harish is ready. Great. We can't hear you, Dr. Harish. We can't.
Yeah,
Great.
am I audible now?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
Well.
So I'm just going to be warning in the next 4 minutes that caution, the stenosis ahead. And we have the impact here. The incidence is about 38 to 45%, humongous. We don't even realize that stenosis does exist. Once we pass it and there is nothing there, so we forget it. And it's most common in postmenopausal. Of course, the leading limiting factor is that it can lead to failure of your office procedure or even the hysteroscopic procedure in conventional in theater. It can lead to an incomplete surgery. It can lead to complications. And these are the types of cervical stenosis that we have been devised by Batocchi and Attilio. And type 1 is external cervical os stenosis. Type 2 is upper third of the cervix and the internal cervical os stenosis. And type 3 is purely internal cervical os stenosis. And type 4 is combined internal cervical os and external cervical os. And this is most common in postmenopausal. This is common in the patients with previous surgeries. And these are common in nulliparous patients. And this is again, patients with, so mainly when you come with the fertility, you will see type 2 and type 3. And nulliparous patient, you will see type 1. And the postmenopausal, you will see type 4. Now, why this type, why it is required to be, this is type 1, which is very simple. You can just negotiate by rotating your entire assembly into the 90-degree angle and make, align the wedge shape of the telescope in line with the oval shape of the os. And you will be able to easily do that. This is type 2, wherein you can see the internal os is completely stenosed, it's obliterated. What we generally try to do is maneuver 1. Maneuver 1 was alignment if the internal cervical os is about 3 millimeter or more. But if it is less, then you just do with a grasper. You try and first do the central adhesions and then you go on the sides. So you can either do it with the forceps or you can do it with the scissor. And this is maneuver 2, which is into the stenosis management, and that is how you incise on the side and you can come across. This is again the next one, that is in the fertility patient. These are all office patients. So, you can continue doing your office hysteroscopy if you have stenosis like this and you generally don't give ripening of the cervix. And of course, again, the stenosis cannot be cured with just by cytolol or misoprostol. So you need to have a proper method, a therapy. This is an internal cervical os stenosis along with the upper third of the cervix having fibrosis. So we directly went in with the maneuver 3, that is using scissor. Maneuver 4 is using scissor. Instead of using scissor, you use energy to expand the stenosis area. And this is, you can see a footprint, what we call is a footprint of the tissue when you just go blindly and make a marking. And after that, you just excise the footprint part of the area so that your scope can negotiate very easily without giving any issue into the endometrium. And that is the entry into the cavity. And next is a very interesting case. Now, this is an external cervical os stenosis. A postmenopausal patient came with the episode of bleeding. And you can see that's the 9 o'clock incision, then there is a 3 o'clock incision. So then we drained the hematometra. There was a lot of hematometra, pyometra in these patients, very common. Then this is the 12 o'clock incision, and then the 6 o'clock incision. And after that, you can just enter into the cavity. This patient also had a ischematometra and hematometra and ischemocele was completely filled with the blood, and that's the adenocarcinoma polyp which we excised. What can happen if you don't just pay attention to stenosis? You can have false passages or uterine perforations. And you can see that this operator is in a conventional, of course. This you just cannot do in office because the patient will scream out with a loud cry. So the person has created almost a huge amount of niche, and this is the actual path. So this can happen, and once false passage, always a false passage. You must remember that if the patient has, this patient also had a 2 consecutive IVF failure, and both the embryos were deposited into the false passage. There is a huge amount of big cavity there formation. You can see there is the epithelialization, and treatment of this particular false passage is really very, very crucial, very difficult, because these patients have everything all right, the gonads, the tubes, but they just do not know, even if they are going for ART, like suppose the tubes are damaged and they're going for ART, having a passage very well into alignment is very essential. And this is the normal regular cavity, and that's the cavity with a good healthy endometrium. You can see that. And what we generally try and do is come out and start incising this angle between the actual cavity and the false passage. So basically there's a blunting of the, just like an isthmocele. Isthmocele is nothing but a niche that is created by the caesarean scar, while here it is a false passage. And you also incise the epithelium which is there. So once you create a raw area, what you have to do is hold the balloon, the Foley's, in your grasper and go along with it. Because again, you will place the Foley's into the false passage. Here you can see the Foley's is placed into the cavity. You should not, if you have a false passage, you do not think that, okay, there may not be any problem, but always put in a sonography probe. This particular patient had a huge amount of, hydroperitoneum, or you can say there was a lot of edema or extra vasation of the fluid into the extraperitoneal area, and that is what you can prevent. You can also prevent perforation. Thank you very much.
Dr. Haresh, can I ask you one question with Madam's permission?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, can you describe the instruments that you used for this procedure?
No, instrument in the sense, see, these were all
diameter of the instrument, yeah.
Yes, so instruments were 5 French, that is 1.2 millimeter.
Mm.
Yeah. So generally you can measure
sheath and the scope.
Sheath, not all the cases. The postmenopausal patient, I generally use 2.9 telescope with 5 millimeter Batocchi operative sheath. Okay. While all infertility and nulliparous patient, I generally use 1.9 scope and 4 millimeter Batocchi operative sheath.
Thank you.
What are the intrauterine pressures you start with, Dr. Haresh, in office without anesthesia?
Yes, so office is generally without anesthesia, without analgesia. I don't put IV line. Generally, the pressure should never ever increase more than 30 millimeter to start with, because the starting pressure decides the patient's comfort. Because the moment you go in, you stretch the myometrium, and that is what is going to lead to the severe contraction, and patient is going to have spasmodic pain. So what you should try and do is keep the pressure at 25 to 30 millimeter, and then slowly increase it up to 60 to 80. I have been doing comfortably. At the end result, I take about 80 millimeter of mercury, but till then I generally average keep it at about 60. So to start with 30, then 60, and at the end result 80.
The problem always is in office hysteroscopy is the pain threshold of the patient. So I think a lot of office hysteroscopy is actually related to the pain threshold the patient can take. We will take the next speaker, please. Dr. Sushma, if you're ready, please share your screen.
This is today. Hello.
Yes, everything. We can hear you. We can see you.
Yeah. I'm going to show the case of the intrauterine adhesions. The prevalence we know, I'm not going in detail the theory. I'm just giving the practical tips. This is the patient of 24 years old lady, just visited to me few months back with the history of 3 years amenorrhea. She married 4 years back, 1 FTND, and 3 years back she had she had abortion, and for that DNC was done, and she was referred to me for 3 years amenorrhea. So you can see I start from the directly external os. You can see the very nice cervical canal with the arbor vitae typical. So directly I'm going towards the internal os. You can see there are 2 openings. So which way to go? So increase your pressure. So you can see there is a fibrous adhesions at the level of internal os. I'm trying to increase the pressure. Now that there are very good instruments, that's the forceps. So when you open the jaws of the forceps, the distance is around 7 to 8 mm. Okay, so you can easily go, but still I'm unable to negotiate and move inside. So another important weapon is the scissors. So you can start with already Haresh has mentioned very well. Most of these adhesions patients, they are having this problem, the cervical stenosis. So I'm giving cut at the level of the 4 o'clock position. I'm trying to negotiate, slightly increasing the water pressure, and see, I'm able to negotiate this thing. And it's very simple. You can go and you have to open the jaws again. And so see, I'm trying to go inside the uterus, and so more surprises are waiting inside. See what is there. There's a complete central adhesions in the cavity. You can see a typical cat's eye view. See, you can see the typical endometrium. There is no white endometrium. So again, with the help of scissor, you can give a cut. You can go in the cavity. Again, in the cavity, you are appreciating the complete adhesions are there, but remain in the center. Basic principle is to remain in the center and see the 2 osteas. These are the wonderful landmarks to operate a hysteroscopic surgery. And see, I am cutting with the help of scissor. These are the tough adhesions initially. And see, you can see the 2 ostia. I did the lateral metroplasty also, and see the final result. Now, this patient again reported me after 3 months. In the meantime, I had given her estrogen and progesterone. She even started menses, but a scanty menses, not so good. But she was happy that at least for the first time she started menses after 3 years. So see that this is a second video. Again, you can appreciate the same arbor vitae. See, the same patient after 3 months. You can see the internal os, how beautifully the adhesions were gone. But there is always recurrence of adhesions. So in the cavity, you can see the central adhesions are not there, but the laterally there are adhesions. Yeah, you can see. Again, you can appreciate the right ostium, but the left ostium you are unable to make out. So nothing to worry. See, there appears to be flimsy adhesions. So with the help of scissors, immediately you start cutting. Be careful. With the help of scissor, there is actually no need of worry. No, this is a fear of perforation. So I am doing the lateral also. Lateral cuts also I am giving very carefully. I am trying to open the left ostium also. See, you can appreciate very nicely. See, now again the lateral cuts, I have given lateral cuts also to increase the cavity. So in the midline, small cuts in the midline. Again on the right wall. See, very nicely, you can do it very easily, but you have to be very sure. See, I think it's an appreciable cavity.
Dr. Sushma, are we done?
Yeah.
Thank you so much. We are running short of time.
Yeah.
So I will ask my next panelist to talk about the complications. Dr. Arnab, if you will quickly go forward to that. So in hysteroscopy, the procedures which actually are amongst the difficult ones are hysteroscopic adhesiolysis. And amongst adhesiolysis, depends on the grading, which finally, when you put in the hysteroscope, sometimes you can have a completely plastered cavity. Are we ready, Dr. Arnab? We can't hear you. We can't hear you. Please unmute yourself. Please unmute your.
First of all, thanks to Dr. Sunita Madam and Dr. Bhaskar Pal, and thank you for giving me this opportunity. My topic is on complications on operative hysteroscopy, and as we know that the incidence is pretty low, 0.25 to 0.5% for diagnostic. The risk increases with more complex procedures such as hysteroscopic myomectomy. Complications discussed are either frequently occurring or they can be potentially life-threatening, and evidence of complications are largely based on observational studies. Now, complications we know are basically based on operative skills and knowledge of the surgeon, the use of proper instrumentations and techniques, patient's positioning and anesthesia, the access problem, dilating as we have seen, stenosis, cervical stenosis, the use of distending media, which is very important, which I'm going to discuss, and proper knowledge and use of electrosurgical devices that we have to stress, monopolar, bipolar, what are the pros and cons, delayed complications like adhesions and hematometra, and dissemination of malignancy. Now, I'm going to discuss two very important complications, uterine perforation and excess use of distension media. We know that perforations can be common when there is cervical stenosis or difficult cervical dilatation in congenital uterine anomalies, acutely anteverted or retroverted uterus, scarred uterus due to previous cesarean section, synecdoche, as we have seen in the last case, if you are not very careful, postpartum uterus, uterus with large fibroids, postmenopausal, and most importantly, if we are not able to view during the procedure, so poor visualization during the procedure. And what are the consequences? Most of them will be minor without risk of hemorrhage. Anterior wall perforation can lead to bladder injuries. Lateral wall perforations are more dangerous, leads to uterine vessel hemorrhage or broad ligament hematoma. And perforation with activated electrosurgical devices, this is the most critical one. We have to think about bowel injury, bladder injury, blood vessels, and uterine rupture is a later consequence. Now, prevention is avoid excessive force during cervical dilatation, use prostaglandins if the case demands, risk assessment and careful pelvic examination to note the size and position of the uterus, and adhere to strict anatomical landmarks and planes during dissection, that is during synechiolisis or septal resection. We must, as we have discussed already, that the planes are very, very important. Stick to the planes and not go beyond that. And avoid activating energy devices without proper visualization. This is most critical one. Now, if we have perforated, most of the time, if it is, how do we know? The first is recognition, so sudden loss of resistance, loss of uterine distension, and we might be able to visualize some contents of the peritoneal cavity, such as omentum. And management, if it is because of small devices like diagnostic scopes or dilator, just observe the patient, start antibiotics. If it is perforation with energy devices, stop the procedure immediately.
Just 1 more minute, please.
Yeah, and we have to do the laparoscopy or as the case may demand. And due to cervical injury, we have lateral wall injury. The bleeding is the primary problem. Now, complications due to distension media, we all know that the mode of electrosurgical device will dictate. The thumb rule is surgeon's team has to be overtly vigilant about the monitoring the fluid deficit, and regardless of the nature, all distension media are associated with serious life-threatening complications. As we know, electrolyte containing media such as normal saline we use in bipolar, the key risk will be fluid overload. Whereas if we are
sorry to interrupt you, we have 10 minutes left for the panel end.
Yeah.
Okay, and just give me 30 seconds. I'll be done. And in monopolar, we use the 1.5% glycine. The key risk here would be hyponatremia, as everybody knows, hypervolemia resulting in critical complications such as intravascular hemolysis, hepatorenal failure, cerebral edema, encephalopathy, coma, sometimes respiratory or cardiac arrest, and rarely death. So here we have to know that the normal sodium concentration is between 135 to 142, and the critical level of hyponatremia is below 120. If it goes below 120, it leads to severe complications. The thumb rule is for every liter of glycine absorption, the sodium concentration will decrease by 10 millimole. So we have to be very, very cautious, and we restrict the fluid to in glycine to 1 liter deficit and not more than that. And if it is a normal saline, it is 2 liters. I think I've stuck
Thank
to
you
the
very
time.
much. Thank you very much. Please stop share your screen.
Yeah.
So from here on, we are running short of time, as I see. I would like to take you through the challenges in hysteroscopy. Since our topic was about hysteroscopy and troubleshooting, so visualization is a very big challenge in hysteroscopy. Distension is another very big challenge in hysteroscopy. Flow rates are challenge. Intrauterine pressure, what is the right pressure, is a challenge. Fluid intravasation, which is ml per minute, which is different from fluid deficit, is another thing we must understand when we do hysteroscopy, that there are two parameters which are separate from each other, and there are bubbles. In pathologies, we are still having more studies, awaiting more studies towards not only management, but also looking after the pathologies like adenomyosis, isthmocele, even myomas, preserving the pseudocapsule. You have Litter's technique, you have Mazarini's technique, the myometrial cysts, endometrial pathologies, and tubal osteas. So these are the challenges. This was one of our challenge in hysteroscopy, where patient was referred for removal of a tip of a Carman's cannula. This is how the Carman's cannula looked, and it was actually quite into the tubal ostia, and it took us. It had the gynecologists had tried multiple unsuccessful attempts to remove it, but it was not possible. So we had to actually remove it with the, you can see the loop. We had to go right into what's important in this picture is the fact that you need to have a constant distension to be able to remove the Carman's cannula from the cornu, which was impacted there. This is again looking at genital tuberculosis in additions, and this is how the images look like. You have powdered, irregular, shaggy looking endometrium. We were published in JMIG with the endometrial tubercular abscesses, which are so common in our country, which we see often. But again, taking biopsies is very difficult because they are fluffy. The grasper doesn't kind of, it's not enough. So it's a good idea to take the biopsy in and around the area where you are finding either the abscess or you are finding any pathology related to tubercular and tuberculosis. The four features for diagnosing tuberculosis are adhesions, which may be flimsy. There will be bizarre looking endometrium, which is shaggy, and the glands are not as visible. We were on the cover page of Fertility Sterility, where you can see the intrauterine intraluminal tubal adhesions. So it is not only, this is not exactly a challenge, but if we learn to play with the flow rates, we learn to play with the visualization, we learn to play at the cornu, and we can actually do a falloposcopy, identify the tubes which are normal versus tubes which are abnormal. That was, all of those pictures were those of genital tuberculosis. Now I have pictures of chronic endometritis. So chronic endometritis has four features. You have angry looking gland openings, you have undulating endometrium, you have stromal edema, and micropolyps, which are less than 1 millimeter in size. Here in this picture, we were published in AJOG with angry looking gland openings surrounded by a red halo. The next challenge is a myometrial cyst. Myometrial cysts, actually, you are seeing a video here, and this is a resection being done. The challenge here is that the endometrium goes right into the myometrium, and when you're going to be, you need very precise distension. You need precision in actually doing your resection as well. Because if you do a little more, if you cut in a little more, you're going to have a lot of absorptions. So these are the surgeries actually for ill-oriented surgeons, and they should be taken up in the later part of the curve. When we were doing this, a turbid chocolate-colored fluid came out. Similarly, deep adenomyosis is another entity which we need to look out, and we are in a phase of understanding with all the classifications which are there, and the hysteroscopic management of adenomyosis, especially in cases of.
Ma'am, 2 minutes left.
This is this is a cesarean scar, and of course we talked about isthmocele. These are retained products, and in retained products, sometimes the challenge is that long spicules actually go and impact themselves into the tubal ostia like this one. So sometimes you even have to change the size, shape of the loop in order to remove it. We have talked a lot about submucosal fibroids, but I would like to show here that what are the points which we need to take home is that we need to survey the cavity first. We resect the intracavitary portion. Do not resect yourself into a hole. Remove only the chips. You need to move the resectoscope, not just the loop, but maintain the visualization, keep the distension heavy, and don't leave pieces hanging. When getting deeper into the myometrium, expect fluid deficits to rise more quickly. Identify the pseudocapsule, desiccate the bleeders as needed. Keep a close watch and fluid intravasation at all points of time during surgery while operating on submucosal fibroids. And it's a very good idea. I quite like the Lastmos classification. It helps you identify and pre-plan your surgical moves. Endometrial dissection is another surgery which is not only challenging but dependent on the operator skill. So that's another surgery where we need to understand that we need to remove all the layers of the endometrium in order to get good results. So here you are seeing the posterior wall of the endometrium, uterine cavity being resected, and it's important that we resect the niches also, because if we don't, then the glands are going to be left behind and there is going to be regeneration and you're not going to get a good result. I'm going to take this forward. I think we are already done on time, so I will restrict my presentation to just one thing which I would like to put forth here is the AAGL practice guidelines, and we were a part of the practice guidelines. Our papers were part of it. The pink highlights that you see are a part of that. So what we started, one of this paper was actually included in the guidelines, and it says it's a simple technique to reduce fluid intravasation. So all that you need to do is just stop your surgery, wait for 10 minutes, and then restart. It brings down the absorptions by almost 67%, which it's a physiological thing. It's just that it's hard to do.
Ma'am, time's up, ma'am.
Thank you so much. This is the last slide. This is a new hysteroscopy pump to monitor real-time rate of fluid intravasation, which I talked about, which is fluid deficit.
Thank you so much.
Thank you
so much, Alka.